Welcome to all of you for this next session. As already announced, the monograph by Marijana Vuković with the title Survival and Success of an Apocryphal Childhood of Jesus, Reception of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas in the Middle Ages. My name is Reidar Aasgaard. And I'm a professor at History of Ideas / Intellectual History at the Faculty of Humanities, University of Oslo, Norway. I remind you to mute your microphones and keep them muted for the whole of the session. And as most of you know, there will be no live questions. Instead, you can, during the session, post questions in the questions and answers box, Q&A box. And I shall, after Vukovic's presentation, read the questions aloud for her to respond. Marijana Vuković is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Southern Denmark and a visiting researcher at the Center for Medieval Literature in Odense. Vuković holds a PhD degree in medieval studies from the Central European University in Budapest in 2007, and she has later had fellowships and research positions at various universities, such as in Sofia, Vienna, Berlin, and then also Oslo. Over the years, Vuković has obtained 2 PhD degrees. The first is in medieval studies from the Central European University in 2015. This dissertation, entitled Remembering a Lesser Saint, Irenaeus of Sirmium, and his story in the medieval East and West, is planned for publication with Routledge. Vukovic's second PhD is in religious and literary history of the Middle Ages from the University of Oslo in 2018. Here in Oslo, Vuković participated in the international project Tiny Voices from the Past, New Perspectives on Childhood in Early Europe, in which I served as a project director. I also had the pleasure to be her PhD supervisor. And the monograph she will be presenting today is a revised version of her dissertation in this project. In the last years, and now I use her first name, Marijana, has held a postdoctoral position at the University of Warsaw in the ERC project, The Cult of Saints, where she collaborated in producing the Oxford Cult of Saints in Late Antiquity database. In her present position at the University of Southern Denmark, she's engaged in the Retracing Connections project on Byzantine story worlds in Greek, Arabic, Georgian, and Old Slavonic. Here, Marijana studies the transmission of the massive corpus of Byzantine metaphrastic texts among the South Slavs in the 13th and 14th century. She has also published several articles on saints, hagiography, and the reception of ancient literature in the Middle Ages. Marijana has had a special interest in working on medieval religious literature from a comparative perspective. In her research, she has made use of various theoretical approaches such as narratology, intertextuality, new philology, and memory studies. As for historical sources, she has focused on hagiographies and apocrypha and how they have been transmitted in Western Europe, Byzantium, Balkans, and the Eastern Mediterranean, a broad area. In particular, she has pursued the changes which scribes, sometimes accidentally and at times purposefully, introduced in the manuscripts and the transformations in meaning which followed from such changes. This is also a central element in the monograph Marijana will introduce to us now. Her volume deals with the Infancy Gospel of Thomas and the changes this apocryphal story about Jesus as a child underwent in its transmission and reception. The book shows that this story was used in a variety of settings to promote ideas and attitudes about childhood and ethnicity, Christology and Mariology, and also other matters. A special quality of this work is that the transformations of this material are traced across several languages, including Greek, Latin, Slavonic, and even a bit Georgian. With this, I give the floor, or rather the screen, to you, Marijana, to share your presentation with us.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
I'll share my screen. Can you see the PowerPoint? First of all, thank you very much, Reidar, for this kind introduction. And thank you, Petros, and all the organizers for this lovely event. It's been a pleasure. So my book entitled Survival and Success of an Apocryphal Childhood of Jesus, I must say in the opening, does not affiliate exclusively with Byzantine studies. The text whose reception I studied in this book did not stay restrained to a single linguistic area. It was transmitted to several other languages besides Byzantine Greek. So in this book, I follow up on its afterlife in the medieval Latin world, also Byzantium, and the Slavic world, South Slavic world, and to a lesser degree, I discuss its whereabouts in the Syriac and Georgian linguistic areas. Since this is a book about the reception, it necessarily touches upon at least a few historical periods. So the text in the case first emerged in the early Christian context of the 2nd century. It was transmitted in medieval manuscripts based on which I conducted my research. So due to the span from the text's initial appearance to its reception, the book could qualify to contribute to the early Christian studies, but also medieval, Byzantine, and Slavic studies. Thus, my remark from the opening of the presentation. The book, however, targets the Christian Apocrypha, which I would say attracted little attention in Byzantine studies. It is difficult to say whether there is a study of Byzantine apocryphal literature in a proper sense, even if some scholarly titles qualify for this category, such as, for example, this book. They mainly attract the attention of scholars working within early Christian studies. At the same time, the early Christian studies significantly draw from the Byzantine period, especially when it comes to manuscript study. So in this presentation, I first wish to emphasize the close links between the two areas of study, and also to call for broader attention from Byzantine scholars to this connection and also to this subject. The book, Survival and Success of an Apocryphal Childhood of Jesus, focuses on a 2nd century Christian story about Jesus's childhood. The text is called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. For those of you who are not familiar with the text, I would just briefly say that it contains a series of episodes in which Jesus, who is here described as a terrible child, works miracles, kills and blinds other children and adults besides his other activities. Although apocryphal and having such contents, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas survived the late antique period and was translated into many languages and textual versions where translators and copyists allowed themselves to transform, appropriate, and reformulate this text. In the previous research, especially in the initial phases of the study, this text attracted interest maybe from the 16th, 17th century. The text became interesting for scholars, but it also encountered a lot of confusion and controversy as well. The miracles of Jesus were often called ridiculous. And now I'm quoting from my book where I quote other authors who say that. So the miracles of Jesus were often called ridiculous, immoral, puerile, malevolent, cruel, while Jesus was a hero of ridiculous and shabby pranks, and a terrible child who seldom acts in a Christian way. Some scholars discarded this text as utterly worthless and lacking in good taste, restraint, and discretion. And the text was eventually characterized as a neglected outsider, placed at some margin of the early Christian literature. These attitudes of course, changed in recent scholarship thanks to the new publications, among which Reidar's book on the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, as well as books by Tony Burke, Stephen Davis, Marijana, and others. In my book, I demonstrate that the Infancy Gospel of Thomas not only survived the Middle Ages, but also had a voice in transferring important ideas that shaped medieval minds in the East and the West. Sorry. Now I show you the contents. Besides this initial introductory chapter, chapter 1, the book has 3 other chapters focusing on different aspects of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. The second chapter studies its appearance in manuscripts in 5 different languages and chronologically. The third chapter focuses on its textual transformations, while chapter 4 distills the ideas and perceptions of children, childhood, family, and everyday life from the various versions of the text in alignment with the project Tiny Voices from the Past that Reidar mentioned at the University of Oslo. Now, among some of the most exciting conclusions of my book are the following. In the realms in which it was used, which most commonly, I must say, include monastic settings. This text was mainly part of the so-called primary miscellany manuscripts, meaning that it was planned to be part of their contents from the beginning. There are only a few traces of physical destruction or emendation of the text, and here I show you one of them, this 14th to 15th century manuscript, nowadays kept in Vienna, OMB library, Historicus Graecus 91, where you see that the text is crossed over. However, there are a couple of other examples. For example, Georgian text, which is some pages of it are ripped off, so they are no longer extant. But these are only a few examples. As I said, the majority of manuscripts keep this text within the primary miscellanies. In some settings, for example, South Slavic areas, this South Slavic manuscript keeps the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, where the text appeared in the manuscript arranged according to the daily readings, which allows us to think that its use was connected to the liturgical cycle. It's a bit blurred, but maybe you can see that the text starts with the word chetenia, which means reading. But the text was definitely the most popular in the Latin West, where it was testified in over 200 manuscripts. It was usually copied in the West in combination with other apocryphal texts, constituting the group called the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, which promoted a cult of Mary. As part of this group, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas also greatly influenced the popular piety and visual representations of Jesus and Mary in the late Middle Ages in the West. On the other hand, it is important to say that this text cannot be found in extensive number of Byzantine, Slavonic, and Georgian manuscripts, and it was also unrelated to the cult of Mary in Byzantium. Since the genre of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas vastly fluctuated from one setting to another, it is important to emphasize that in Byzantine manuscripts, the text found its place among other monastic readings, hagiographies, and homilies, appearing with a distinct title, which allowed us to think that it could have been likewise perceived as a kind of narrative similar to homiletic or hagiographical literature in the Byzantine context. This text further supported the enhancement of anti-Jewish sentiments, although again, in some environments more intense than others. Some Latin versions contain solid anti-Jewish rhetoric, and the manuscripts containing the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew often contained other texts with anti-Jewish subjects. In Byzantine manuscripts, particularly some of them, these anti-Jewish attitudes were mainly blurred and neglected, leaving the descriptions of, for example, Jewish individuals or groups or crowds either inconspicuous or even erased. Finally, studying the ideas and perceptions of children, family, and everyday life related to the different environments in which the Infancy Gospel of Thomas was used and read, I allowed the possibility that some of these descriptions relate to Byzantine and other medieval realities. These were mainly side subjects within the text, usually not theologically saturated, and they refer to the depictions of peer relations, peer pressure, peer violence as well, the descriptions of children's classrooms and descriptions of housing, also the healing methods, particularly connected to the medieval Bulgaria. With that said, I also want to emphasize at the end that the book may be of interest, not only of those who work within the areas of study that I already mentioned, but also those interested in book history and book culture, readership, and also the application of contemporary theoretical approaches to ancient and medieval texts. So I would like to thank all those who helped me to complete this project and the book. And I also thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.